What's up, guys? This is Twisted Mind, and here's our raw capture footage of the first kill that we got on Grand Empress Shek'zeer in Heart of Fear. This is the final boss in Heart of Fear, and this is a really critical encounter for your raid to get down because you can't actually start on the next raid, which also came out this week, called Terrace of Endless Springs, until you down this boss. So, we're a little bit behind here, like in terms of like progression on this guy, and this is the first this is the first attempt that we've gotten after we just finally broke down, looked at our logs, and tried to strategize about this fight, because we hit ourselves against it for like 3 nights, and it felt like we weren't trying these different strategies. I didn't actually know exactly how my absorbs worked on this fight until this particular kill. This is our first attempt of the night, and we got him one shot. So, there are a lot of hidden tips and tricks, especially as a disciplined priest, that make this encounter ridiculous easy. Okay, now, here's the abilities. It's in 3 phases. You can't really, it flip-flops between phase 1 and 2, but really, you're only going to have one phase 1 and one phase 2 before you have to push into phase 3. So, you're going to have one phase 1, then one phase 2, then one phase 1, and then you have to push into phase 3, or else you're going to wipe due to the enrage. So in this first phase, these little pools on the ground, that's the thing that's going to wipe your raid probably the quickest. They're called dissonance pools. They kind of behave like in a strange manner. If you're standing in them, they have an energy bar. You can't see it. I just have the floating nameplates because the energy is being depleted at the same rate as the floating nameplate is on it. But if you cast a spell and you're standing in that dissonance field, you can go down. You can cause it to shrink down faster. And the reason you want to shrink it down faster is because you don't want both of these to go off at the same time. If you do nothing with them, they'll both go off and they'll insta-wipe your raid. As you can see, the amount of health they hit for when they do explode, which is physical damage, by the way, so it can't be absorbed with like the magical reduction raid cooldowns. Now, the other mechanic about this is, okay, so you need to rotate somebody who's standing in there so it can absorb their energy. Well, there's this debuff going out in people. See, the debuff on the player right now that I'm loading up with absorbs is called Cry of Terror. Cry of Terror is something that I didn't really understand. This is why I said it's really weird with absorbs. Cry of Terror, if it's on you, will just pulse shadow AoE damage to the whole raid. However, since these dissonance fields absorb all spells, they also absorb the spell from that pulsing damage. So you want that person to stand in there, and that will nullify effectively all of the damage. However, that damage can also be nullified by any absorb effect. Anything that you can do to reduce its damage or reduce anything, or any absorbs you can put on yourself, shields, when you're not standing in the dissonance field, that also takes out the damage. So I'll explain specifically what I'm doing in the phase 1 when we get back to it, because this is a really clutch phase 2. After a fixed timer of 2 minutes 30 seconds, phase 2 happens, and then there's another couple what-if strategies here. As you can see, there's these 2 big adds. It's not feasible to blow up their health by normal conventional means, but you need to down them in the allotted time. And then there's all of these little mini adds. The mini adds, as you can see here, fixate on people. They drop these little pools in the ground. And then when they're standing next to each other, you can't see this, but that enrage buff on the target I have targeted right now, that's because the more things that are standing closer together, they give each other a stacking 30% buff to the outgoing damage. So there's a couple strategies here. One, you do what we're doing. They both come out in easy packs, one for each tank, and then the tanks, since they're going to be taking ludicrous damage from all of the adds stacked on one another, get ludicrous vengeance, and we just roll really heavy cooldowns. The downfalls is what just happened. You run out of cooldowns, the tanks are taking bananas ridiculous hits here, like with this strategy, the way we're handling it. So this is an option to you. I've also seen videos where one tank takes both of the 2 big guys, because the thing about the big guys is you have to point them away from the raid, and they do this little cone damage. But see, there's a hidden thing about that too. These big guys also put out this debuff called Poison Drenched Armor on the current tank. Well, if you're standing near that tank, like, in melee range, you also get that. It's a buff, and what it does is it actually increases your damage because it gives your attacks an extra chance to do damage. So your strategies may vary here. I have seen people take that guy 2 out of the raid and then just AoE all of those little guys down in a nice controlled manner. We decided to split them up here. You want to keep the little guys called Wind Blades up a little bit longer than normal. There's, Wind Blades are those guys, the little ones. The Wind Blades will drop those little pools in the ground, and what you do is you have to run over a pool. It'll do damage to you while you have it stuck to your body, but it clings to your body until you run into another pool, and what it does is it forms a trap. So that happens after 4 of those pools come together, so that's 4 total things you have to drag over there. And what happens in a trap is if you drag an ad into the trap, or anybody, like it can also affect friendly players, it just stuns them and it starts doing damage, and it's like a damage based on the percentage of their health. So you want to do this ads management where you want to keep those little guys up just long enough so you get 5 of those spawns of pools in the ground, and then you want to drag both of the big guys into there and kill them. What we tried doing on a couple of nights, and this is before we looked at the logs, was we actually left one of the big guys up at maybe 40-ish% health and just tanked him right next to the boss, because that poison-drenched armor that he keeps casting, it's going to keep casting and it's going to keep giving all of our DPS that extra DPS boost. The truth is, we're 3 healing this, there's 2 tanks, and we are still making the phase 3 transition push with plenty of time. So we found it to be unnecessary, but if your DPS are really struggling and you have some pro healers and tanks, that's like an option available to you. Now here's the specifics of what I'm doing. For one, I have Fade glyphed. So you'll see my Fade popping in and out of cooldown here. It's because I'm using it as a damage reduction when I'm standing in the dissonance field, because damage reduction abilities like Fade, Pain Suppression, Iron Bark, all of those things, those will reduce the incoming damage you get from just standing in a dissonance field. The other thing I'm doing here is I'm trying to juggle. I did this whole fight in previous attempts with Mindbender because I just could not keep my mana up. Upon learning that if someone is not standing in a dissonance field and you can put an absorb on them and nullify all of the damage that the raid is taking, we didn't have any mana problems anymore. So I actually took From Darkness Comes Light, because what I do is I penance somebody. If the penance does proc a Divine Insight proc, I'll game the Divine Insight proc on somebody regardless of whether or not they're standing in a dissonance field. If it didn't, then I'll start dropping flash heals on them to try to get Strength of Soul to cool that down faster, and then I'll try to get another shield on them. The deal with the shields is it's really weird. I thought Spirit Shell, like many other priests have said this too, so this is becoming public knowledge on the forums, but it's incorrect. Many priests are saying that when you're standing in the distance field, Spirit Shell will keep effectively healing the player that's standing in it. This is not the case. If you cast any spell on a player that's standing in the dissonance field, it actually absorbs on them. However, the exception is if you cast a critical heal, for whatever reason, even though it did 0 healing to the person, it still gives them a Divine Aegis shield. So as you can see, go back through the attempt here, I'm very situationally choice using my Inner Focus Greater Heal on somebody who's standing in a dissonance field, so I can get that guaranteed bubble on them on top of my Power Word Shield bubbles. I'm trying to juggle the 2 bubbles, because the more bubbles you can get on someone, the more stable their health is. Otherwise, they'll get really low on health, and then they have to run out of the distance field for heals so they don't die. Really frustrating. Now, obviously you look at this encounter and you're like, okay, when a dissonance field, it blows up and does a shitload of damage. We're 3 healing it. You can see how much damage is going out. You would think that the best strategy here is to use Spirit Shell on the raid damage. There is a point in my rotation where I try to get Spirit Shells up on the whole raid for raid damage 3 to cap on everybody, but it's not always the case cut and dry, because one of the things that's also really dangerous is, okay, if people are topped and that explosion goes out, it drops them to about 1/3 of their health, but they're not dead. That's the thing. They are not dead, and if you stood in the distance fields correctly, you won't have them going off so close together you can't get people topped back again ready for the next explosion. So it's actually better for me to lay single target heals with Spirit Shell on the person that still has the debuff, if the debuff's out there, because that effectively stops the additional shadow damage that they're doing to the whole raid. So in the future, since I didn't get a whole lot of time to practice this new strategy, look to see me maybe looking to squeeze in some Rapture tricks here for maybe some more mana. But basically, if you get there's 2 sets of dissonance fields in the phase 1, which you're supposed to do twice, 2 phase 1s. Once you clear out both those dissonance fields, make the push in a phase 2. It starts at 30% of the boss's health and it's a straight burn. As you can see here, many deaths, one of which is a DPS and a healer. He does this thing that's kind of, well, I mean, if you're familiar with Anubarak from Wrath of the Lich King, you'll kind of understand what it means to keep people at kind of half health or low health so they don't get too much damage from this ability. But basically, he pulses this thing, and what it does is it makes everyone's health like 50% of what it just was. So it's pretty huge. Absorbs are really effective for it. a druid and I too healed it. The other thing he does is he puts a big purple cone on the ground. Don't stand in it. It's really easy to avoid. If you do stand in it, you take damage and then you get feared. You need to be dispelled right away. The other thing is there's these 2 debuffs that are going out. Those 2 people need to run out of the raid because they'll blow up after 4 seconds and then they'll be feared. They have to be dispelled. And then throughout the entire fight, whenever you're tanking the boss, there's this thing that stacks up to 5. You want to get it to 4 and tank swap, because if it gets to 5, you get mind controlled and you need to be killed. So always tank swap at 4, and then the end, you want to just cluster around the boss and run out for the fears is what we found best. It's really easy, just roll heals and heroism to the end. And this is the cutscene for when you do kill it. This is the big bad boy that you're going to have to kill at the end of Terrace of the Endless Springs.